Lauren, it's the final COP drop.
It certainly is. What a journey it's been. Welcome, everyone, to the COP Drop. This has been a daily live stream during COP28, hosted by Faiths for Biodiversity Coalition and the United Religions Initiative. Each day, we have been discussing the latest developments from Dubai with a focus on nature and biodiversity and learning about the amazing ways faith and spiritual communities all around the world are working to protect and restore the environment. My name is Lauren Van Ham. I serve as the Climate Action Coordinator for the United Religions Initiative, and I'm joined by my co-host and colleague friend, Gopal Patel, who is convener of the Faiths for Biodiversity Coalition. Gopal, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm sad that this is the final COP drop, but I'm very happy that we are joined by Azmaira Alibhai, the Faith and Ecosystems Coordinator at the Faith for Earth Initiative at the United Nations Environment Programme. And I'm glad that we are not in Dubai because we are in overtime. They were supposed to finish at, I think, at 11 a.m. Dubai time with the final text. It's now 8 p.m. and they still haven't finalized it. So prayers and good wishes for all of the negotiators there kind of going into like extra time. Why don't we start there? Asmira, any thoughts on kind of where we are with the text and the process?
Thanks, Gopal. I did want to lift up and start by speaking about a statement that we have hopefully all seen. That's the joint statement on climate, nature, and people. There was a very strong call from to hear high-level declarations that emphasizes on the need for coherency, for integration across the conventions. So we're not only talking about climate, but also the biodiversity convention, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, but as well as oceans, because ocean seems to be that forgotten thematic area. Very important, but a lot more work needs to be done, at least from the perspective of the Faith Actors Network and with regard to ocean conservation. We saw this, or we heard them say that what they hope to see is that we find this coherency, this integration in the NDCs and MBSAPs. And there's also a need for whole of economy and a whole of society approach. So equity, inclusivity, and effective representation of all stakeholders, Indigenous people, local communities, faith communities, women, youth. This is so important. And we heard this as well in the global stocktake that we're not on track to achieving the 1.5 degree target unless we have this whole of economy and whole of society approach. And so that leaves us with this opportunity for faiths to make the commitments and to really understand how to contribute to these processes and even understand what comes out of them. In terms of what we can expect from the final text, as you said, we're in overtime. But what we will hopefully be seeing is that there's a tripling of the global capacity on renewable energy after the US and China made their pledge to work together and to strike a deal as two of the most the highest emitters in the run-up to COP28. And as we see COP29 approach, we also hope to see a rapid phase down of unabated coal, that kind of language in this final text, and curtailing the new number of licenses. Low zero emission technologies, we hope to see that also come through very strongly, and the removal of technologies including removal technologies that capture carbon and utilize and storage and store energy. Climate finance. Now, there will be language on it, but we have heard the executive secretary of the UNFCCC say that we do need to work on an ambitious finance goal at COP29. We heard Secretary General say, look, we keep kicking the can down the road. Now is the time for ambitious action, ambitious goals to be made. But it looks like the final text will have weak language on climate finance. Now, during the preparatory meetings for COP28, we were hoping to see the monitoring and evaluation and learning mechanism or system come through under the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation. Unfortunately, we're not going to see that because there are some insufficiencies with regard to this goal. But this just goes to show that it is harder to move, and this is the narrative that we've been hearing at COP28, from what we need to do to how we need to do it. And the fact that the MEL system, isn't featuring strongly as part of, not having a strong commitment to it, or without a program of work attached to it, is proving to be difficult to shift that needle. Yeah, so a lot more work needs to be done on Article 7.1. Hopefully we'll see this at COP29, but of course, time is running out. The draft text did have language on the consumption and production of fossil fuels in a just, orderly, and equitable manner that falls short of what civil society has been expecting on the phase out and phase down of fossil fuels. And no language on oil or natural gas. As Lauren was speaking, and Lauren, hopefully this is a good transition into some of the previous conversations that have been had. The language on CBDR, the common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacities. Now, with regard to fossil fuels, there has been some back and forth on what exactly this looks like, because there is a risk, if not done properly, of widening the developmental gap and widening how African countries or developing and underdeveloped countries address fossil fuel consumption. And last but not least, we're hoping to see that that there is at least a call for more ambitious NDCs, at least in the next round, that are comprehensive, that are measurable, that are tied to the Global Goal on Adaptation and the Enhanced Transparency Framework. So with that, lots to expect. Hopefully we will see that, but there has been some back and forth on the language and human rights that I think is critically important, especially with regard to the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment that we saw adopted last year by the UNGA.
Yeah. Thank you for that great analysis, Azmaira. And I want to read out ACT Alliance put out a statement yesterday saying that the current draft text has small fruits among large thorns. So there are some wins, but there are still some big thorny issues that are unresolved or not as strong as many of us would like. I think you mentioned there around fossil fuels and financing. It's interesting. I was reading today, some African leaders were saying there's a huge gap in financing when it comes to implementation. So only 10%, for example, 10% of the financing that was pledged for implementation has actually been committed and delivered by wealthy countries. And so, the fossil fuel issue is a huge one, but there's also the financing gap as well, which you were just raising up, Azmaira. Lauren, do you have any thoughts in terms of where we are right now with the text and the process?
Well, of course, I start thinking pretty immediately about in what ways can we be walking our talk even at the grassroots level, or especially at the grassroots level, because I do believe that our actions matter. And so even as Myra is speaking and there are things that can just feel so deflating or so disappointing, I'm also remembering things that we heard in yesterday's episode with Dan Perel. I'm thinking about Alan from Sinessa. I'm thinking about various voices and the presence of people in previous Cop Drop episodes who have really, really provided roadmaps for us to essentially model how. And that's what Azmaira was just talking about, the how. So we're looking for whole of economy. We're looking for whole of society, and the how is the question, and the just transition is very difficult to think about perhaps on a continent scale, but it isn't so difficult to think about when a few houses of worship come together and start thinking about it in a micro way. And so I think there's a real invitation for us to lean in with the kind of ambition that we expect from those who are higher up the chain. What do you think, Gopal? What are you thinking about in this moment?
Yeah, I'm trying to process everything, like what does the text say? There's a lot of commentary which has been going on now in terms of the actual process and the methodology of the COPs. And there was an article this morning on The Guardian, which was saying that, maybe if this COP is a failure, which Al Gore is already saying that it's going to be, maybe that's a good thing, because sometimes failure is needed or disappointment is needed in order for us to regroup and say, okay, what isn't working and what do we need to recalibrate so we can get things moving in a positive direction. So I'm just thinking, like, this COP, there was a lot of hope and ambition, but there was a lot of skepticism going into it. I really hope that we can get over the line in terms of the strong language that I think a lot of us want to see. But if we can't, it's an opportunity for us to regroup and see, okay, what can we do better next time round? And we know the next climate COP is in Azerbaijan next year. That's already been announced. So that's kind of where my mind is going, is, and I think that's in many ways a spiritual question or a spiritual conversation, is like, how do we pick ourselves up in the face of defeat? And I think we're going to have to be ready to recalibrate either way in a couple of days' time, once hopefully the text is done in a couple of days. And so then we can regroup and recalibrate and think through, how we want to engage over the next 12 months. So that's kind of where my mind is going. And then Azmaira, I'm wondering, from your perspective of being an insider at the UN, you're probably party to these kinds of conversations more than us on the outside. How does it feel with that insider's view in terms of just looking at the process as a whole?
Well, I should probably mention that I'm not at at COP28. Yeah, you said that at the beginning because
Yeah.
it has been a crazy process. Incredibly overwhelming, not because we have the Faith Pavilion, but just the sheer number of people and the size of it. I've been hearing reflections from partners who are on the ground on just how hectic it can be when there's too much going on.
Yeah.
But that brings me to my response to your question, and this is my own perspective, that if there is indeed quite a bit happening there, many pavilions to see, different the areas of work that you need to keep your eye on, keep track of, in addition to the negotiations, then how are we really listening to one another and fostering the kind of partnership needed? Right? Too many things happening for you to be everywhere at once. So I think from the perspective of some of the participants, look, they have been able to get some really good insights and make some really good connections. But at the end of the day, when it comes to keeping a tab on perhaps the totality of the work that we're doing, because we don't only work in the climate space, but also in the biodiversity and the pollution space, and the city's sustainable mobility areas. How do we keep track of all of this when we want to, but probably cannot? But not to sound too too doom and gloom, but this is something to look forward to in Azerbaijan. How do we keep tabs on more than one area of work? How do we keep ourselves sane? And also have time to really reflect on the process, as you said, because there is, I think, some learnings that we can take away from this COP in terms of how do we get over some of the blockades to getting to where we want to be on this ambitious target, whatever it may be, on loss and damage, on adaptation, on fossil fuel phase down or phase out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to what you said earlier about the statement that came out around connecting climate and nature, I think that is one of the, from our perspective as Face for Biodiversity, that's one of the big wins. It's something that we've been speaking about every day on the COP drop, is how to align the different conventions and processes. So the fact that that statement came out is good, that marrying the NDCs to the NBSAPs, recognizing that these are interconnected crises. We just heard yesterday that Colombia have said that they want to host COP16 next year, and I think a number of large NGOs have come out in support of that. So hopefully that can get approved, and so that we have a venue for that, so we can start mobilizing our advocacy around that. But Lauren, I'm wondering, like, what are your highlights from this COP? What are you thinking that we can use to take forward into the new year?
Well, certainly there's great spiritual teaching, as you said, Gopal, in allowing a failure to be a failure and then thinking about what we're learning in the process of that. I am vividly remembering a few days ago when we were able to speak with Azmaira and Carrick Redden of WRI together. And Carrick was sort of inviting us all to imagine a regenerated Earth, right? Instead of thinking about the fear and the scarcity and the dystopia that is coming, what if we were motivated by a flourishing planet and economies that were absolutely interwoven with land and water? And I know that cooperation circles across the URI network are really talking about these things. The young people are trying to find revenue streams and jobs that are rooted in the health of the trees and the water, as well as the local community. I'm also thinking that there are Indigenous siblings and friends of ours who in many ways have been saying, that's right, that's exactly right. Yes, do that.
Right.
And so we listen to the wisdom of that teaching and continue to put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, for sure. Azmaira, what are you going to take from this COP as we move into the new year and start planning for next?
Well, lots of learning from the Faith Pavilion in terms of hosting at least 80 partners, friends, in 60 plus sessions. You know, it's been crazy, and hats off to the team. You know, Dr. Yad has done a fantastic job in pulling together partners from the Muslim Council of Elders, the and of course the core planning group, which includes okay, I'm not going to, sorry, I was just trying to avoid getting into listing that for the fear of missing anybody, but the core planning group that has been critical in putting it all together.
Mm-hmm.
But of course we've seen at least, or we heard that 7 trillion of annual finance flows have been fueling the climate, biodiversity, and land degradation crises. And on the flip side of that, we did see very strong commitments made for mangrove restoration and other restoration projects to the tune of 186 million US dollars pulled together for financing on nature and climate, for mangrove restoration and conservation of ocean of the ocean. So that's really been on my mind in terms of what we're seeing, highlights from the Faith Pavilion, from the restoration commitments, the food system commitments, the fact that, you know, in spite of what we've been hearing, there are some commitments being made. But the question on my mind again is, from the 60 plus projects that we saw at the Faith Pavilion, how do we gain access to this financing? Is it through national authorities? Is it through, you know, funding mechanisms, whether philanthropic or the GEFs and the GCFs?
Right.
How do we as faith organizations or the Faith Actors Network make ourselves more attractive to these funds?
Right.
And what does scaling up action really look like? How do we mobilize the efforts of one another and lean on each other where we can, where we should, so that it's a real science-driven process, and leveraging on the networks, not just the inspiration, but the networks, the assets, and of course the ambition that the faithful have for our planet.
Right. Yeah, I think after we were in Montreal last year and we had, our own faith pavilion there and we only had 20 events, and we felt that was a good number for us to manage. But we certainly have felt during and since then, like a lot more responsibility about how we show up, not just in these spaces, but afterwards, and the responsibility that we feel around, okay, now we've got to step up our game. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to there, is like, okay, we've had a sizable presence at this COP for the first time ever, a faith pavilion, which has been amazingly executed, all the core partners and associated partners. But now the real work happens. Eyes are going to be on us. People are going to be expecting us. Can we step up? As you're saying, the asks that we have for financing, the asks that we have for certain kinds of partnerships, that comes with this whole new set of responsibilities on us as faith actors. Do we have the capacity? Do we have the experience to step up to that plate? And so I think this is a really critical and important moment for us to showcase that, yes, we can come around and talk, but now we can also now mobilize ourselves so that we can be ready for any new funding or new kinds of partnerships, so we can we can scale up the work that we're already doing in partnership with other actors. So it's a really exciting moment. And I hope that in the next 12 months, we can continue working together, bringing, biodiversity, climate, desertification, pollution together as we look towards next year and the 3 COPs that are going to happen, and UNEA, which happens in the first quarter. Lauren, I'm sad that we're having to close out the COP drop. Let's go around and let's say like a final few words of reflection or thoughts as we close out today.
Sure. It has been really great for me to spend time, Gopal, with you every day, Azmaira a couple of times, and all of our other friends who have joined us from Dubai and beyond. I think one of my main takeaways here is when I think about a planet that has been so supportive of the human species, even as we have harmed her repeatedly, it feels really, really good to be with others in community who are saying, I want to do this differently. How can we collaborate together? How can we cooperate to reduce harm, heal, repair, restore? So I am so glad to be with you in that conversation and taking action together.
As we've said, action follows commitment. We've seen so many come together, not just in the Faith Pavilion, at the Confluence of Conscious, the high-level faith leaders meeting that happened just before, and make really impressive commitments, and hats off to everybody who did so. But now is the time to put that into action. And we recognize that a lot of faith communities, the leaders, the actors network are doing fantastic work. But now more than ever, it's important to have these critical conversations on what's not going well, what we think we can do better, make the partnerships to facilitate that, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And there's no need to start from scratch anywhere. And I think we really enjoyed this collaboration with both of you. And we hope to see this ripple up with so many other partners as we expand the areas of focus that we're looking at, but also when we take a critical look into some of our results, and how we can orient that towards what we intend to see in the years coming forward, so that we're really deliberate about serving the communities that we are here to serve.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to end it. I couldn't say it better myself, that it all has to come back to the communities in which we live and serve. This is what it's all for. So thank you both. Thank you everyone for joining us every day for the COP drop. It's a bittersweet goodbye, but we hope to be with you again at some point in the future. But we wish you all a happy rest of the year and look forward to connecting again soon.